Acute intervertebral disc disease is something that we commonly treat. It's one of the most common surgical diseases that we see in a lot of the dogs that have the long back. Now, with this, we usually see an acute rear limb paralysis, and the animal can actually present with ataxia in the rear, knuckling of the rear paws. Other times they're actually dragging. Some of them can be dragging their rear legs. And when we do either radiographs or they've had some other sort of advanced diagnostic, you'll see that these animals have a compressed disc. I've seen many animals for which they had no deep pain, they had no neurological response to deep pain stimulation in the rear legs. They were told by surgeons that really, if there's no deep pain, probably then the dog was going to be a poor candidate for recovery, a poor surgical candidate, and that perhaps euthanasia would be the best solution. And I would say that since using Chinese herbs and acupuncture together, that many of the dogs that have no deep pain can be treated successfully and recover, even if they don't get surgery. Because some of the patients that were sent to me were ones where, or came to me, were ones where the owner, where surgery wasn't an option for whatever reason, either the condition of the dog or it had to do with finances, or the dog had no deep pain. So they didn't want to spend the money based on the prognosis given. And this is how I found out very well that Chinese herbs, along with acupuncture, can be very helpful and curative in cases of acute intervertebral disc disease, even if no deep pain is present. You should treat them anyways. If they're going to respond, they typically do this within a week. So the animals that come in with acute intervertebral disc disease, a lot of them have a lavender purple tongue because there's stagnation of qi and blood in the channels and collaterals of the spine. The pulse is rapid. And you should also add here wiry. In many cases, the pulse is wiry. There's qi and blood stagnation. There's a wiry pulse. And many times the pulse is very rapid in these cases because they do have inflammation and pain. So the TCVM diagnosis is qi and blood stagnation. And the herbal formulas that are used to treat intervertebral disc disease vary depending on the pattern. There's many different patterns of intervertebral disc disease. There's two excess patterns. One's from wind, cold, damp invasion. There can be from acute trauma, acute onset with no trauma. Then there can be qi and blood stagnation from acute trauma. So the two excess patterns are acute trauma with qi and blood stagnation and invasion of wind, cold. And then there's two deficient patterns that I usually treat, qi yang deficiency and qi yin deficiency. So Xiao Hu Lu Dan is a formula that I use to treat invasion of wind, cold. I particularly use this formula in many of the older patients that come in. This formula can be given with Western drugs, but you have to be careful because if they do have spleen qi deficiency, there will be problems giving this particular formula. So this treats obstruction of the channels with wind, cold, damp. It's minor invigorate the collaterals, special pill. If you notice, it contains aconite. So it's aconite, as we know, is very warming. It dispels cold and relieves pain. This is a formula that we often modify to treat other cases besides wind, cold. So we will modify this formula with things such as Quan Che, which is Scorpio, to further improve pain relief and scour the channels. We'll use blood movers like Hong Ha. We will use Dan Shen. Sometimes we'll add Noto ginseng to it. So this is a formula that, depending on its modification, has a wide variety of uses to treat intervertebral disc disease, but it is not for long-term use. I typically use a spleen tonic with it. An interesting thing is that it contains D-Long. If you see the very last herbal there, D-Long is earthworm, and that's used to activate or scour the channels. And other times, this formula, I have used it with single herb modifications. Other times I add a blood stagnation formula to activate the blood, and this helps to relieve more of the pain of the intervertebral disc disease and help clear the channels faster. So this formula can be used for acute arthritis, soft tissue injuries, navicular disease, spondylosis, lumbosacral disease, and acute intervertebral disc disease. I've also used this for wind stroke. I've used it also in some cases for facial paralysis cases. Now, acute neck pain. Acute neck pain, we see this very commonly in Dobermans, we see it in Great Danes, and we see it in some of the smaller breeds. I see it a lot in Chihuahuas, I see it in pug dogs. Acute neck or cervical pain, these animals, it's really obvious because they have a lot of stiffness. When you touch their neck or their head, they cry out, especially if you touch them. They have an inability to get up on the bed or up on the sofa like they normally do. They hold their head downward. And again, if you just go to even pet them or try to pick them up, they'll start having problems with pain and start vocalizing loudly. These animals can have a red to purple tongue because of stagnation. The pulse can be rapid and wiry and forceful. And this condition is considered to be a B syndrome, B obstruction syndrome caused by wind dampness. And the representative formula for treating this is called Remove Painful Obstruction Formula. Now, it treats B syndrome that occurs secondary to deficiency of the yin and the wei with a concurrent invasion by wind damp. And so a lot of these animals most of these animals that for which this formula is most effective have to do with animals that do have a deficiency of the yin and the wei that are young, but a lot of these animals are middle-aged to older, and they start having painful neck. So a lot of the animals are typically weak that I use this formula for. Not all of them. You can modify it, again, as you do most of the formulas, depending on the individual patient. But the Huang Qi that's in it is used to, Huang Qi, Dong Gui, Zigan Sao. The Huang Qi and the Dong Gui is used to harmonize the yin and the wei. The Zigan Sao is used to harmonize the formula. The first two that are listed are the ones that we use, the single herbs listed there are used to dispel wind, because again, this formula is used more to treat attack by wind damp in animals that have a deficiency of the yin and the wei. Now, I've used this formula for intervertebral disc disease in the neck. I've used it for just pain, spasms, some animals that have cervical spondylosis. I feel that it's most effective, and it is most effective for the upper part of the body with the arm and the shoulder. I think I use this more for animals with neck pain more than I do for just plain shoulder or elbow or carpus pain.